This is the Night Shift Podcast, powered by Black and Gold Banneret, your home for news and analysis from all UCF Knights sports. The Night Shift starts now. Welcome to Night Shift on this final day of the month of March. We sleep in May. Jeff Sharon here along with you. We've got Eric Lopez, we've got Bryson Turner, we've got Don Struble. We got quite a bit to cover actually in this episode. We're going to catch up with baseball and softball, both of them hitting some serious bumps in the road. And I think I'm being kind by saying that, at least at this point. We're going to do a quick little preview of basketball as well, men's basketball playing in the Crown tournament. We'll try and keep you updated on exactly who will be available for UCF when they play Oregon State. By the way, who will be available for Oregon State on Tuesday when UCF and the Beavers hook up. And we have a very special interview. I wanted to get some lay of the land a little bit on the House settlement having to do with the with obviously NIL and the NCAA's structure for revenue sharing, and call up Alicia Jessop, lawyer and a professor at Pepperdine, one of the leading minds in sports business. She joined us for a little bit. I'm going to play a full interview for you here on the podcast. Big thanks to Alicia. But let's go ahead and start with your UCF news. We're going to start with baseball. And what is going on here? On the 22nd of March, a mere 9 days ago, this team was 16-4, or excuse me. Let's back it up. 2 weeks ago, this team was 16-4 after a 3-0 win at Stetson. Since then, they have lost 6 of 7 and just got swept at Cincinnati against it's a fairly pedestrian Cincinnati club. And the Knights are now 17-10 on the season, and in conference play in the Big 10, or Big 12, they're 3-6. And this is a team that, Bryson Turner. Okay, what is going on here? This team is 9th in the country in batting average at 329. They're 10th in the country in ERA as a team at 3.64, and they're in this slide. What is going on?
So let's go ahead and just start. Let's not forget, by the way, that part of that losing stretch you talked about there, Jeff, is a loss to Jacksonville in a midweek game. When I saw that was happening, I was like, oh no, with Cincinnati happening there. But here's some stats for you. I've for anyone that is wondering where my baseball recaps have been, well, I'm kind of cooking up a little something where I basically am able to try to diagnose what the heck is happening with this baseball team right now. Here are just some of the findings that I found at this point. When it comes to runs scored, UCF has scored 38 runs in its last 8 games, which is from Stetson through Cincinnati. They scored 67 runs during their first 9 games of the season, which is Siena through that first USF game, which was the run rule game. So to give you an idea there. So we're not scoring at all. We're not scoring at all. Our on-base percentage is absolutely plummeted. We're during this last 8, 348 on-base percentage. Our team on-base percentage for the season is 430. So that's how far down we are at this point in time.
That's 80 points down from the season average.
Yeah. And that, but the biggest drop is with runners on base and runners in scoring position. So when you look during the stretch where we were on top of the world from the second game of the USF series through BYU, we were 390 with batters on base. Mm-hmm. Our last 8 games, 265 with runners on base.
That has fallen off a cliff.
And then runners in scoring position, we were hitting 375 with runners in scoring position during that stretch of USF game 2 to BYU. 224 in our last 8. For perspective, from during the first stretch of the season, our first 9 games from Siena to the first game of the USF series, which this is including the run rule game that we lost to USF, we were hitting 297 with runners in scoring position. So this is even like way worse than that.
Yikes.
So that's just and then our batting average, we've hit 264 in our last 8 games compared to 391 from USF game 2 to BYU, and then 312 from Siena to USF game 1. So our batting average has absolutely gone through the tubes. And then our pitching, which has always been, I think, a bit of a struggle, has also kind of dipped as well. We've struck out 56 batters in our last 8 games. For comparison, we struck out 93 batters from USF game 2 to BYU. We struck out 88 batters from Siena through USF game 1. I like to compare this with kind of that first 9 games, that first 9 games of the season, because that's kind of where we kind of were a little bit iffy, because that included, like, the Bryant series and then USF game 1 in there, FAU. Yeah. So that helps. So that sort of helps me. Helps.
And the ERA, the team ERA has nearly doubled since that opening stretch.
Oh yes. So that opening stretch, 2.97 ERA. Our last games from Stetson through Cincinnati, 4.78 ERA. Our team ERA for the season, mind you, which is still lowest in the Big 12 somehow, by the way,
and still top 10 in the country.
Is 3.64.
Wow.
You have and then on base percentage allowed too. So opposing batters have gotten on base 366 in our last stretch. For comparison, the first games of the season, Siena through USF game 1, 307.
Man.
So this is just, we've seen it with Dominic Castellano and Chris Losnowski. We've seen the guys that are normally all reliables in the pitching staff for Rich Wallace have just absolutely collapsed in the course of these last few games. I don't know if they're just going through a rough spot or something, but something is going on there, and everything has just been in an absolute free fall. The batters I can maybe understand, because sometimes you have your hot and cold streaks. It happens with batters, but that in combination with this decline in pitching quality from even before this has just led to a storm of UCF losing games where, considering where it's ranked, it really shouldn't be.
Yeah. It's not going to get any easier, by the way, because they're playing Stetson at home on Tuesday. And this is a Stetson team that actually, since they lost to UCF 2 weeks ago, has heated up. And they have won 6 in a row. In 4 of those games, they scored 11 runs in each of them. Don, I wanted to bring you in. Like, why? Well, we've gone through the why. Now we got to get to the what are they going to do about it situation, because after Stetson, then they got 3 games at home against Kansas. So this 4-game road trip, including 3 to get, to try and get back on track in conference play. But, this is April now. I mean, they're going to have to start hurrying up, because the really thick part of the schedule is still coming up with OSU, Texas Tech, et cetera, coming down the line, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's not going to get any easier than here or from here, especially with Kansas coming up. And I think one thing that this team needs to start limiting, something that I've noticed with the Houston series, is they're giving up a lot of runs in a singular inning. I believe the first game of that Houston series, they were up big, and then they proceeded to give up 7 unanswered runs in the later innings towards the end. And that's just not something that can happen. Kind of goes back to Bryson's point about just the pitching needs to be better. I mean, he read off a plethora of statistics for the audience that really illustrate the problems from a technical standpoint with this team. I just want to see that they have to get their confidence back. I mean, the last game that I was able to cover in person was after they beat Miami by 10 points. Everyone was hitting, pitching was on point, and they just seemed like they had a good composure and a swagger about them that they took with them to the frigid mountains of Provo to win their first Big 12 series.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what's happened since then. I mean, especially with the Jacksonville loss. I mean, you look at that, they lost 3-2. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Bryson. What was it? They were 9 of 37 at the plate.
Or they only had 6 hits. The big thing is that they gave up is they committed 4 errors in that game, which allowed Jacksonville to score 3 unearned runs in the second inning, which is all the runs they got in the whole game.
That's my point. Letting these clusters of scoring for opposing teams happen in 1 or 2 innings. Like
it was all in the second inning. It was all
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Game 1 of Houston, 7 runs, guys, in a 2-inning span towards the end of the game after being up 5-0 or 5-1, whatever it was. It's just that is not a recipe for winning baseball. And I, for one, am getting a little worried about my preseason prediction that we put out on New Year's Eve.
Well, I will say this, though, as I'm looking at the Big 12 standings, right now K-State is in the lead at 8-1, Arizona State 7-2, Kansas, who's coming up this weekend at home 6-3, tied with Arizona. And then there's, you talked about a cluster. There's a whole cluster right after that. West Virginia 4-3, TCU 5-4, Baylor, Cincinnati, BYU, Texas Tech 4-5, UCF, Houston 3-6. So even though there's been some damage done, you can get some of that back. And I want to bring Eric here in on this too, because their RPI has obviously taken the hit. But it's like I said, the damage is still recoverable now, right?
To some extent. The problem is the Big 12 is down this year. Oklahoma State.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah,
Oklahoma State's having a down year.
They're 1-6.
Yeah, Texas Tech is down. So you're not going to really gain a lot there in the RPI. Now, you're right. Baseball, you can make up ground quickly with weekend series. And certainly Kansas this weekend would help start that. Kansas State right now looks like the best team in the Big 12. They're one of the 2 teams ranked in the top 25 in D1 baseball, which, by the way, all you UCF fans that try to go after D1 baseball, who got the last laugh there? Be careful where you go after. They know what they're doing over there. So, they're all mad. Where's the Big 12 ranked teams? Well, this is why.
So KU, by the way, 23-6 overall. I think them and West Virginia right now, they have the best overall records in the league. West Virginia's at 22-4. Anyway, go ahead, Eric.
No, you're right. And Kansas has been one of the big surprises and good stories in college baseball this year. They're not, they've gotten good crowds. So we'll see how real they are this weekend. I will say this, the offense, Bryson right off. In fairness, those numbers were eventually going to come down. To me, the offense ain't the issue. They scored enough runs this weekend at Cincinnati to win that series. That's not the issue is the pitching. I don't think they have a weekend rotation right now. Hartley's the only starter I think people trust consistently. Dom Stagliano has not pitched at the level of last year. They tried Siegel on Sunday. That didn't work out. You also have Dom Castellanos, who was a weapon out of the bullpen last year, was an all Big 12, consideration per player. Have teams figured him out? He's definitely not pitching at that level either. The bullpen's been hit late. Cincinnati won the late innings in that series. So I think the pitching has been the question mark all year round. And how do they have answers in that roster from a pitching standpoint that can fix this? A, get quality starts from your weekend guys, and B, get quality innings out of the back end of your bullpen.
Yeah, well, this is not going to get any easier right now with, obviously, we talked about Stetson coming in, who seems to have found their footing in the last 6 games. And now, like you said, Kansas, tied for third in the Big 12. But, like we said, if they can figure out the pitching, to me, that's something that, it's going to be, it's starting to approach now or never. Once you hit April, I feel like now is the time when you're like, okay, we got to get this thing together in a hurry. And then after that, they go on their own.
Well, and the problem they have on their resume, they're about, according to Warren Nolan, I don't know why NCAA didn't update the RPI this week, but they're 69 in the RPI with the 106 toughest schedule. That's not a strong schedule.
No, it's not
121 in the non-conference. They have 3 quad 4 losses. For all the praise we've given Bryant, all right, and how good supposedly they are, this year is not one of them. They're 253 in the RPI. They're 3 under 500. That's one of those.
That's surprising because when we played them, I thought that I wonder what happened there because I thought that was a team that was going to be a really solid mid. We all were saying they were going to be one of the solid mid majors.
Not this right now, it ain't.
Wow.
And then Houston, you lose a series to Houston, who's 151 in the RPI. Jacksonville, which Bryson alluded to, is near 100 in the RPI. So, I mean, those are some tough losses to take. And, so they got to figure it out. They do have games that they can get them back up there. But, again.
Cincinnati's 81.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not pretty, but. And again, it's harder to me, it's harder. And I don't know if Don and Brett, you agree, we got two completely different teams right now on campus. One team that struggles offensively, but has good pitching. And then one that can hit, but can't pitch. Which problem would you rather have? I actually rather have not this problem, because it's a lot harder to hitting in baseball or softball is hard enough. You can't expect them to hit at a record pace like baseball was early in the year. And that's why I think that's the concern. You've got to figure out the weekend rotation and the bullpen.
Yeah, I agree. Because that's the thing is every team is going to hit a slump eventually. What are you going to get out of your starting rotation and your bullpen to back you up and really fortify a winning just formula in general, So, yeah, great point, Elo. I think that in this sport, what you're getting from the mound, it takes priority, and it's the answer most times.
Bryson, quick last word to you.
I would just say absolutely. I mean, even in Cincinnati, the hitting did enough to where I think they should have won the game. And I think that the best way I can explain it is that's game number 2, 10th inning. We got ahead, and then you load the bases with like 1 out, and you give up a 2-run. I mean, the frustration of that moment, that's what pitching can do. As much as the batters can hit all the live long day, you need your pitchers to just stop the bleeding and let your batters do the work. And that's a lot harder to fix. So Drew Thomas certainly has a task in front of him as you move forward. But let's remember that this team did not win a 3-game series last year and was still one of the last 4 in. So it's still recoverable, but it's going to be a mountain to climb for sure.
Yeah. Tuesday against Stetson at home, 6 p.m. first pitch for that. And then Kansas, who's currently number 23 in the country, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 6, 6, and 1. All those games on ESPN+. By the way, UCF heads up to Jacksonville again, this time to play North Florida, UNF, on Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, 6 p.m. We're recording this on Monday, March 31st. All right. Eric alluded to it earlier. We got to check in with softball here because, they got the win over Florida last week, 4-0 in a huge victory at home in front of a massive crowd. But then traveled out to Waco, Eric, and Baylor did some Baylor things, beat UCF in a couple of 1-run games to start before the Knights got them back 7-2 in the third game. But not an ideal situation here for softball as they're sitting right now at 22-16-1 and 4-8 in the Big 12. And it does feel like a little bit like, the youngsters that you were talking about, they kind of are falling back to earth here.
Well, it's a roller coaster. I mean, that's definitely a roller coaster. I mean, if you would have said last week this team would go 2-2 this week, I think people are like, all right. You lose to Florida and then maybe you win the Baylor series. Instead, it was you win the Florida game and you lose the Baylor series. You lose 2 1-run games. You struggle to hit. That's been something that's been scuffling offensively. Young hitters, I think have been okay, but a couple of them have scuffled. But really, the veteran hitters haven't hit much either. That's been the problem. Usually when you can't depend on your young hitters to carry the load if, all the time there. And I think some of the veterans haven't hit well during the slump offensively, and they've wasted some good pitching. Now, the good news is you saw it. It's in them on Sunday. Broke out for 7 runs. Samantha Ray hits her first career home run. Beth Damon had a big game. Sierra Humphreys set the tone with a leadoff home run. You just wonder, man, why can't you just be a little more consistent? Because you're getting the pitching. You're getting Isabella Vega, who I would expect to will win some awards probably by this week. Look for that. Don't be surprised if that occurs with the way she pitched last week with the win against Florida and even her 2 appearances against Baylor. She was magnificent. You're getting good outings overall, but the offense, they don't have good timely hitting. I think they're still figuring some things out. I saw Taylor Kittleman got the start on Sunday, got a couple of hits. So I think they're searching there. The good news is, unlike baseball, they still have a resume to make the tournament. They're 35 in the RPI based on the fact they have played, I believe it's now the top 10 non-conference toughest schedule in the country. They're about 2021 overall in the country. They have about 8 top 50 wins. And the good news is, as bad as that record is in the Big 12 is, I've talked to committee members. Conference records don't matter. They do not matter. They will tell you that. They look at teams as at large. That is a misconception that people, well, you finished in the bottom of the league, you're not going to get in. Not necessarily, especially now in these conferences that have imbalanced scheduling. That is why they don't.
As the Big 12 does in softball, right?
And them and every sport now.
Yeah,
like it's wild. Now I'm not excusing it. It's not ideal because we'll get into the schedule stretch coming up. But that is the good news is you can you have a resume. Now the question is, how many more losses can you take when you consider you got to go to Oklahoma this week for 2 games? You got St. Thomas in that tournament. You got to win that game. Like whatever happens against Oklahoma happens. St. Thomas, you cannot lose that game. That's close to a quad 4 loss. UCF, unlike baseball, has avoided a quad 4 loss to date. That's the only positive. However, you got coming up Oklahoma, then you go to BYU. That's not going to be easy. Ask the baseball guys how that's like in Provo. And then you come home for Oklahoma State, who's the defending, reigning preseason pick in the Big 12 with one of the best pitchers in Ruby Malin. So this schedule is a rough patch there, and they're probably going to have to get to me close to about 30 wins this season and feel pretty good about making the tournament. Otherwise, it's going to be close. But that's youth for you. You just have a young team that hasn't gone through adversity. Sometimes they can't figure it out right away, like maybe as quick as you would like.
Let me ask you about this weekend coming up, because this is the ostensible bye week that they would have from Big 12 play. But they're going out to play. They're going out to Norman, Oklahoma to play Oklahoma twice. And Oklahoma's Oklahoma. Their RPI right now is 9. They're fantastic. Don't sleep on St. Thomas either. All right. Now, St. Thomas is an interesting case, and I wanted to bring this up. They were a Division III program in 2019 and were so good that the conference that we're in kicked them out, and they decided to go D3 to D1. They're in their last year of reclassifying, so they can't play in the postseason. That starts next academic year. But here they are playing, Big 12 teams in softball. And, St. Thomas, it's located in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. They're 19-11. I mean, this is don't sleep on them, right?
Well, they just beat the defending champions in the Summit, Omaha, 2 out of 3. They're near the top of the league in the Summit League. That's why I'm saying, I'm not even joking. That game worries me a lot more than even Oklahoma, because you don't have to worry about being prepared and ready to go to play Oklahoma. But don't fall asleep on that St. Thomas game. And that's that with a young team, that's the big question. We saw this earlier in the year against Georgia Southern. They came out a little lethargic. Don't do that against St. Thomas. We'll see. That's where the youth, the intangibles guys, that you can't equate. How do they handle that? Could tell you all more so than how they do against Oklahoma, whether this team will be okay and can rebound and make the tournament, or just miss out in the tournament. Those games like that can make the difference.
All right. Softball schedule, once again, just to mention for everybody. Unfortunately, no ELO this weekend because they're on the road. Number 1, Oklahoma in Norman, 8 o'clock, SEC Network Plus. Is that right? Friday?
That is correct. There'll be an Oklahoma produced broadcast. Yeah.
St. Thomas on Saturday at 11 a.m. No TV, it looks like, for that. And then they play number 1 Oklahoma again at
Oklahoma will be top 5 by the time the polls come out. They lost 2 out of 3 to Tennessee this weekend, so they'll probably be anywhere from 2 to 4.
All right. So we'll keep an eye on the what they're calling the Okana Invitational, and then UCF doesn't come back. No midweek this coming week because they got to go out to BYU.
You got to go to beautiful Provo there. Who knows what the weather
is? It is beautiful.
Shannon Sale, the assistant for UCF, obviously a homecoming for her. She played at Oklahoma, so
all right.
I'm sure they'll honor her while she's there.
All right. Now let's go over real quick to basketball because speaking of how do you handle a situation, this is going to be real interesting for men's basketball. We've already kind of previewed this Oregon State game coming up, but we have a little bit more detail to bring to light, especially regarding the transfer portal. So UCF is going to play Oregon State in the first round of the Crown Tournament in Vegas on Tuesday. Here's the story for UCF. Keyshawn Hall in the transfer portal, as well as having declared for the NBA draft. Yes, you can do both. He will not, as far as we know, be available for the game on Tuesday. Now, several other players who are in the transfer portal will be available. But right now, Bryson Turner, how many UCF Knights do we have in the transfer portal?
Including Keyshawn Hall, 8.
8. That's a lot. But we're thinking probably 7 of them might be in uniform. We'll have to see exactly. We really even don't 100% know at this point. Now, the one good thing about that is Oregon State, they're in big trouble because their top 3 scorers all in the transfer portal. Latest reports are that they may not play at all. Michael Rataj, Parsifala, and Nate Kings. They were the only 3 players on the Oregon State roster who averaged double figures this year. So as we look at the preview of the game coming up, UCF is a slight favorite to win. But this is just a bizarre situation. Throw it open to you guys, Elo. I guess we'll start with you, Elo. It's college basketball in 2025, right? But like, this is one of those things where it's like, man, is this really what we were bargaining for here for this?
Well, the tournament knew this was a part of it. Like, people are like, man, what were they thinking? No, they were thinking ahead because they have done this to where, part of the reason this tournament, the big selling job is they cover all the costs on the travel.
Right.
And the budgets and everything.
Whereas the NIT, for example, you have to bid
and
then you have to make it up. You have to make money on the back end, which you don't always do.
Correct. And then they have the incentives of, hey, you can make money. You can win money if you do well in this tournament. Incentives. If you play in this tournament and you do well, you will make money towards the program for NIL. It's very similar to the regular season tournament that took place in Vegas earlier in about November range when they did a tournament where, hey, you play in this tournament, you will make money that will go help you towards your NIL initiative. And boy, we need that. So if you're a player, even though you're entering the portal, you have the leverage here because obviously the schools need bodies. And if from your standpoint is, hey, if you contribute to this team in this tournament and you do well, let's say you get to the final, maybe you win the tournament, you're going to make some coin out of this. So I think that's the story with this and why, even though there are guys in the portal, there will be some guys that will play despite being in the portal just because, hey, it's an opportunity to make some coin and make some investments and maybe also help your cachet, if you will. Maybe, you're in the portal. What a better way to sell yourself than being out there playing well. So I think that's the selling job for everybody. And we'll see how it goes and we'll see how many players commit to it and how many don't.
Jeff, do we know if those top 3 Oregon State players, like in the portal, do we know if they're playing or do we know for sure that they're not playing?
There was a report that they were not on Oregon State's SI.com site by Matt Bagley. Lost 4 players to the transfer portal, 3 starters. Of course, naturally, they describe us as the Golden Knights. So, yeah.
What else is new?
Yeah. But, they're saying that the matchup is Oregon State has to play small and UCF is playing with a very thin bench. So, but again, I don't think we're 100% sure. I mean,
okay.
At least as far as this, because, like you said, the transfer portal players may, we certainly have several of them playing for UCF. We don't know how many are playing for Oregon State. Don, I'm going to go to you here on this one. UCF is a 4.5-point favorite. Fair on this one in the Crown. It's who knows? I mean, it's hard to evaluate anyway, and now it's even harder.
Yeah, when you lose that much scoring from either team's top players, for the most part, I mean, we really got to see for Darius and Mustafa to really take the lead in this game.
Yeah.
I expect, if Jordan Ivy Curry is back up to speed.
And you said he is coming back next
year.
Yeah.
Yeah. For
That's
those
good
who have
news.
missed it, yep. Jordan is coming back. And so we'll see what he can bring to the table. I know he's been struggling with some health recently. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those things where I think that's a fair spread. We're looking at an Oregon State team who's 77th nationally in scoring defense. They only allow 68.8 per game. Meanwhile, UCF, conversely, allows 80.1 per game. That ranks 337th, guys. So, and that's the thing is, we'll have to see what the final roster looks like. But you really want to get a disciplined performance, especially if this is going to be a low-scoring affair. You're going to really have to play disciplined defense and do what UCF does best: get to the line and hit your free throws. They're top 10 in the nation, as far as I understand, in getting to the line. They rank 22nd in the nation in free throw percentage.
The problem is Keyshawn Hall was a big part of that, though.
Keyshawn Hall was a big part of that. But I see Darius to be in his absence in a much more aggressive mindset for dribble penetration, looking to get inside and looking to get easy ones from the line. So it's going to come down to that. It's really an interesting time of year given who's playing, who's not. I mean, this is not something that we would have seen during the regular season, obviously. But now it's a different landscape for both clubs, or
at any point in the history of college basketball, for that matter.
Yeah. No, these are weird times, my friends. Go ahead, Bryson.
College basketball. Welcome to bowl season. Now you know how college football fans feel now about bowl games. I was gonna say. So, one player that I believe that will play, from what Jeff has told me, DeMarco Minor on Oregon State. I don't think he was one of the names that from Oregon State that entered the portal, right?
Yeah, I think he's still active for Oregon State. He's not one of the 4 that they highlighted.
Okay, so DeMarco Minor is 5th in the West Coast Conference in assists and 6th in the West Coast Conference in steals with 47 this season. So you talk about disciplined game, Don. With DeMarco Minor in there, you got to make sure you watch out for him when you're on offense. And then, depending on what happens with Oregon State on Oregon State's offense, I think DeMarco could still very well be able to dish the ball out at certain points in time. So no matter who he's passing the ball to, it just really depends on who it's going to be, depending on if those leading scorers come back. So Minor will be somebody to keep an eye out on for the Beavers.
5:30 p.m. Eastern time, 2:30 Pacific tip-off on Tuesday for UCF against Oregon State. Winner of that game plays the winner of Cincinnati and DePaul, which play
Cincinnati.
I know. God. Can you imagine if we match up with them again here?
Oh boy.
Well, I'm going to be real honest. I have stakes involved in these games, gentlemen. So I need UCF to win 2 games. Can they do this? Can we win 2 games? I do not need 1 game out, but who knows? Yeah, Cincinnati would not be ideal. I don't think they have anybody in their portal. I think they got pretty much their nucleus. I think they're DePaul. Obviously, Coach Holtman his first year did a good job turning DePaul, which was a laughingstock in the Big East, to kind of respectability. So let's just see if we win the first game. I will say this: with all the missing guys, could it be guys that we might actually, the irony of all ironies, maybe we'll be a little better defensively? Huh? Can I tell you on that? Work on defense. What else are you going to work on?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that would be interesting to me is let Darius really run the team the whole time. I mean, that's what I would do. By the way, Jizzle James is in the portal for Cincinnati, Edgerrin James' son. So we saw him a little bit in both the games. He wasn't a particularly outstanding.
Yeah, he did not have a good year except against us, but he did not have a good year.
Well, yeah. The one game they played at home. He actually had it pretty decent.
I believe Tim Brando and Robbie Hummel will be on the call for the game on Tuesday. So.
Timmy B.
Timmy's got to work, brother. Timmy's working.
Timmy B. Good. It'll be good to hear Timmy B.
And then if UCF wins, I think they play Thursday. And then if they win that, they would get into the weekend. So we'll see.
Right. Well, that's the thing is that you get, okay, so if you win, you get a day off. Then it would be 7 p.m. Eastern Thursday. You play in the quarters. And then, and that, by the way, this is all at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. And then the semis and the finals, they're playing those at the T-Mobile Arena, the big arena in Vegas. And that's a Saturday, Sunday for that. So interesting timing, of course, with the final. By the way, real quick before we go to break, Final Four, are we rooting for Houston?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah?
Big 12? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are your other options? Are SEC or Duke? I mean,
when you put it like that, yeah.
I managed to get 3 of my Final Four right. My championship, though, is still alive. Florida versus Houston. So
okay, who do you have winning, Florida or Houston?
I mean, my family is Gainesville native, so I went ahead and went Florida for that one. I went Florida for that one.
Come on.
I didn't have time to do my research. I had other work to do. I just kind of picked and just decided to go Florida that time.
Come on.
It's going to be a historic Final Four. It's the second time all 4 top seeds make the Final Four. If you look at the metrics, this could be the most loaded Final Four with stacked teams. Cooper Flag, of course. I think Duke's the best team. I think they're going to win it all. But, yeah, I'm rooting for Houston, San Antonio. For nothing else, Jim Nantz, man, he's a fan now. He's a Cougar fan as an alum. He's on the stands. I mean,
should be.
He's enjoying himself. So, Houston, obviously, a great job. They just got better and better as the year went on, and they just, Kelvin Sampson's built a machine there in Houston.
Well, the defense. By the way, the
defense, a great guard play. Yeah.
By the way, the last time the Final Four had 4 1 seeds in it, 2008 in San Antonio. It was North Carolina, Kansas, Memphis, UCLA. That was the year that Memphis and Derrick Rose lost in overtime to Mario Chalmers and the Kansas Jayhawks. Of course, Chalmers had that famous 3-pointer to tie the game and send it to overtime in the final seconds. So, and John Calipari was at Memphis at the time, and Memphis was in Conference USA with UCF.
Correct. That was a great Memphis team. The thing, if you're frustrated, if you're a Big 12, is Texas Tech had Florida on the ropes in the Elite 8, up 9 with about 2:49 to go. And then Florida just went on a run there with their guard play. That just Texas Tech couldn't overcome, but that happens. No women's Final Four teams for the Big 12, by the way. Sorry, Bryce.
Rough times.
It is what it is. I know the SEC definitely and UConn pretty much have that one on lock.
Yeah. Wow.
Speaking of the SEC, Caitlin Peterson to Ole Miss. For anyone who
that did drop, didn't it? KP committed to Ole Miss, huh?
That's right. So.
I mean, at least she's not in the Big 12. So,
well, I mean, she's ostensibly going for her graduate degree up there. So, best of luck to KP in the SEC. It's not going to be easy. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. By the way, before we do, make sure that you hop on to blackandgoldbanneret.com to take a look at Nightcap, which Bryson has been working hard for some great rowing news on there that I want to tease for you. And then also make sure you hit up the our YouTube channel, the NightShift YouTube channel. NightShift UCF is the handle, and you can get some really good football content as well with spring practice. Kyle Nash, who has not been with us this week, and Don Struble have been working hard to get some sound from Scott Frost's first spring back with UCF, his assistant coaches, and, of course, some of his players as well. So make sure you check out the YouTube channel as well. All right, when we get back, special interview here that we conducted actually earlier this week. Alicia Jessop, some of you may know her. If you follow sports business, she's in charge of the founder of rulingsports.com. Professor of sports business and sports law and sports entertainment at Pepperdine, lawyer, deeply involved, one of the leading minds in sports business, particularly with college sports business. I had her on to ask her some questions about about the state of the NCAA right now, in particular with revenue sharing and with what UCF has been doing on their side as they prepare for the House settlement, which may or may not happen in about a week on April 7th. We're going to see if the courts will approve it, but we'll hear from Alicia Jessop and get her insight on that when we return. This is Night Shift. For all the latest news and analysis from every UCF sport, visit blackandgoldbanneret.com, your home for the UCF Knights on SB Nation. We bring you all the latest news and in-depth analysis from across Knight Nation, from football and hoops to golf and tennis. If you want to stay on top of all things UCF, visit blackandgoldbanneret.com, powered by SB Nation. Back here on Night Shift, Jeff, Eric, Don, and Bryson. And, in a little bit more than a week, April 7th is going to be a very big day in college sports. This is when we are anticipating that the House settlement will possibly be approved by a federal court. This has to do, of course, with the NCAA and its revenue sharing structure that's going to be and all the legal wrangling that's been going on about that, having to do with the transfer portal, having to do with NIL, having to do with actual payment to players. And we're in a whole new, an entirely new land as far as the business of college sports is. But I did not realize how uncharted this territory is until I talked with our guest, Alicia Jessop, a leading mind in sports business for years. I've been following her on social for years. And she was here in Florida. She's now out at Pepperdine University. She's a lawyer. She follows this. She's been tightly wound in, or tightly, plugged into the NCAA. Check out her website, rulingsports.com, and look for her on socials as well. She has been one of the leading minds and leading voices in college sports, in particular the business of college sports, as it has changed over the past, really the past 10 to 15 years. And I was fortunate enough to be connected with her and have her on the podcast to sort of just try and untangle what we might be looking at as soon as a week from when you're hearing this show with the House settlement. So here is our interview with Alicia Jessop of rulingsports.com. Here on Night Shift, a special guest. Okay, first of all, I've been following this person for at least a decade on social media when I started. And of course, she cringes at that. But
I'm sorry.
She's the founder of Ruling Sports, a podcast, blog, and media brand covering all things having to do with sports, sports law, sports entertainment. She is a tenured professor at Pepperdine University, the world's most beautiful campus, if I say so myself, in Malibu, California. A longtime veteran of the sports business. Alicia Jessop joins us here on Night Shift. Alicia, did I hit all the things, all the bullet points on your resume there? My gosh.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, and thanks for being a loyal follower. Sometimes I feel like I'm insufferable on Twitter, so I really appreciate it. And I'm a lawyer, so that's why I'm here today.
That's the most important part that I managed to somehow forget. But yes, she. First of all, thank you for joining us all the way from California. And the reason why I reached out to you and brought you in was because the House settlement regarding the NCAA is something that, we're hearing, we hear a lot about it, but it's kind of like this sort of opaque, cloudy thing that has to do with NIL and revenue share. And I wanted to break this down because, even though I've been following it and a lot of UCF fans have been following it, we still don't quite have a whole grasp on what's going on. And UCF also just announced that they're starting a new competitive fund in response to that. But let's start with the basics. To paraphrase Steve Carell, explain the House settlement to me like I'm 10. I know it stems from, back payments of name, image, and likeness for former athletes. But what is it functionally changing for the NCAA and athletic departments at the 30,000 foot level?
Sure. So first of all, I love UCF. Pleasure to be on such a great campus. I used to live in Florida, and about a half a decade ago, I helped start something called the Alliance of American Football, and we played our home games for the Orlando Apollos on your campus. So love that area. So it's great to be here. I think the House case is improperly named in the public because really what is on the pathway to being settled is 3 different cases that were filed against the NCAA beginning in 2020. The first being one called House versus NCAA, the second Carter versus NCAA, and the third Hubbard NCAA. So what's commonly referred to as the House settlement, if the settlement is approved, and we'll get to that momentarily, is really wrapping up 3 different cases. And in each of these cases, then current college athletes or former college athletes sued the NCAA saying that some practice or some rule that the NCAA was engaging in or imposing violated federal antitrust law. So the question then becomes, well, what is federal antitrust law? In the United States, we have a law that was enacted in 1890, so amidst the Industrial Revolution, called the Sherman Antitrust Act. Mm-hmm. And this law prohibits 2 main things. The first is what are called restraints on trade, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then the second is monopoly. The first thing that a restraint on trade prohibits is we have to realize that in 1890, there were barons rising in our nation who were amassing massive wealth, and they were building businesses that were limiting competition. Our government decided that was bad, and they wanted a free economy where everyone has a chance to compete, where prices remain low for consumers, and where there's choice of different products. So examples of things that amount to a restraint on trade in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act are things like price fixing and limitations on output. So what a price fixing is instead of allowing the free market to dictate what the price of a good is, a group of 2 or more entities come together and they artificially set a price in collaboration. So what these student athletes are alleging in part is that the NCAA engaged in price fixing by setting the price that a university could pay a college athlete to 0. So that's the Hubbard case. And I that's why I say that the case shouldn't be referred to as House. I think Hubbard is really the most impactful case of the 3. Collectively, each of these groups of plaintiffs allege that some limitation that the NCAA was imposing, whether it was a prohibition on the ability to profit from name, image, and likeness, or this broader one of prohibiting college athletes from financially being paid by their respective universities, violates federal antitrust law. So long-winded answer, it's not super easy to explain antitrust law.
Right.
In one swoop, and 3 different lawsuits filed by 3 different plaintiffs that could have cost the NCAA upwards of $4 billion in damages if they lost at trial.
Right, because it's what they call treble damages, which means like you take whatever the math equation says, like however much the party was damaged, and then you triple it.
Yes.
And that's what you would have to pay out. I guess my question, a quick follow-up to that. So if the athletes are saying, and this is sort of like a devil's advocate question, like if the athletes are saying, well, we're not benefiting financially from what we're the sacrifices we make, right? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't the colleges or the NCAA come back and say, well, yeah, you're getting scholarships, and why wouldn't that argument work in this case?
That's a long answer.
Okay.
So how the NCAA gets to this position where it's facing the possibility that a judge is about ready to approve a settlement in what is referred to as the House case, where if the settlement is approved, schools will be able to directly compensate college athletes up to 20% of their average annual revenues. This is a vast difference from the 100 plus year historic practices of the NCAA that have prohibited strictly colleges from directly paying college athletes. So what changed? Your question, Jeff, is essentially why can the NCAA no longer point to the scholarships and a very significant amount of scholarships that they give college athletes to defend against claims like this? And the simplest answer, but it's not a full answer, is the Supreme Court's decision in 2021 in a case called NCAA versus Alston, which was also an antitrust law case that was filed by a then current college athlete named Sean Alston, who alleged that the then existing NCAA rules that limited the educational benefits a school could pay a college athlete violated federal antitrust law. So
I see.
If you're lost listening to this, like, the key thing to take away is, in the United States, if you have two or more businesses, which the NCAA is made up of 1,200 member institutions, those are two or more businesses. If you have two or more businesses doing business across state lines, which the NCAA does, right, because schools travel from school A to school B across state lines. So if you have two or more businesses across two or more state lines, you cannot set artificial limits on prices or output without violating federal antitrust law. Now, that's a broad strokes answer because there are different tests that apply to determine if someone is in violation of antitrust law. And where things went really south for the NCAA was in 2021 at the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court applied the test that the NCAA 100% did not want applied. It's called the rule of reason test. And the application of that test to the fact pattern of the NCAA to determine if, when the NCAA sets limits on things, it's in violation of Federal Antitrust Act, has created the environment that we're in today for college sports, where the NCAA no longer can enforce limitations on transfer. It can no longer enforce junior college athletes having extended competition periods. The NCAA has been left toothless because of this application of a body of law called antitrust law in the way that the Supreme Court did in 2021.
Okay. So, yeah, it feels like that, there were just a bunch of like legal hand grenades that got thrown into the room and then someone shut the door. And now we're trying to clean up the mess from that. Like, so when I hear terms like revenue sharing getting tossed about, like we know what that means from like a pro sports perspective, right? In the NFL, in the NBA, MLB, it's not exactly 50-50, but the players union gets 50% of any revenue share, and then the other 50% goes to the owners. We see it, but what does it mean for athletic departments in colleges, and what does also that have to do with NIL, which is another part of this whole legal mess?
Yes. So big question. It might not seem like a big question, but there's a lot of legal intricacies that go into answering this question. So let's start with revenue sharing. So at its core, and I'm going to, if there's lawyers listening, just know that I'm simplifying this for time constraint purposes. At its core, what the House case is about through the Hubbard case is the NCAA's historic bylaw that prohibits colleges from directly paying cash compensation to athletes illegal under antitrust law. That's the issue of this case. That's the main issue. Well, the lawyers have negotiated a settlement to that question so that they don't have to go to trial. The head lawyer for the plaintiffs, the group of people who have sued the NCAA, the head lawyer for the plaintiffs is a man named Jeffrey Kessler. In the world of sport law, Jeffrey Kessler is the god. Jeffrey Kessler is responsible for bringing things like free agency and the salary cap to the NFL. He's responsible for helping end the 2011 NFL lockout. He has been involved in some of the biggest legal moments in American sport over the last 4 to 5 decades. So you have this man who, in his historic legal practice, has helped negotiate salary caps in those leagues that you reference.
Right.
Well, in college sport, we're in an interesting quagmire. The quagmire is universities do not want to recognize that college athletes are employees. A salary cap is negotiated between a league and the union for the professional athletes. To be a member of a union in the United States, you have to be an employee.
Right.
So we have this world in college sports where the colleges refuse to recognize college athletes as employees. Because of that, it's been a long pathway for the college athletes to unionize. And so there's no entity in existence that could negotiate an actual salary cap for the college athletes. So I think people need to think critically about what has happened here, that we have this lawyer who's responsible for bringing free agency to the NFL, has been involved in salary cap negotiations, and he's essentially negotiated into this settlement a cap. Mm-hmm. And it's a cap that was not bargained by the athletes, and it was not bargained by a union. And so the question that should follow that is, does it or does not it violate antitrust law? And are there subsequent claims that are going to emerge if this settlement is approved? So that was the question about the cap. The other question is like, well, where does NIL relate to this? And NIL circles back to that 2021 decision from the Supreme Court, the Alston case. People oftentimes get wrong. They say, oh, Alston brought NIL. No, that's incorrect. Alston is a case about whether or not college athletes have a right to unlimited education-related benefits. We're talking tubas, study abroad trips, laptops. Alston has nothing to do with NIL. We only get NIL because of Alston by virtue of the antitrust rule that the Supreme Court applied to decide that case, the rule of reason. Oh. Essentially, when the Supreme Court applied that test to the Alston decision, the NCAA knew, we don't have a super legally defensible strategy as it relates to imposing some of the rules that we're imposing, one of which at the time was a prohibition on college athletes being able to financially benefit from their name, image, and likeness. So what is name, image, and likeness? At the end of the day, what name, image, and likeness is and what it protects is a right that every other American has, the right of publicity. The right of publicity emerges at the state law level in the 1940s, and it says that every American has the right to financially benefit from their individualism. NCAA rules prohibited college athletes from doing that, but largely because of the outcome of the Alston case and also as the result of moves by state legislatures, Florida, Colorado, California being the leaders, the NCAA had to acquiesce and begin allowing college athletes to financially benefit from their name, image, and likeness. Right. What emerged, though, is this was literally just supposed to be endorsement deals. College athletes were supposed to be like other influencers and go get endorsement deals. Schools smartened up and they created collectives to essentially directly pay the college athletes to bring them to their respective campuses.
Yeah, it's funny how there's always like a way around that. And I remember, former UCF kicker Donald DeLahaye was kind of at the center of this when he was, he was a YouTube star.
Yep.
And UCF was like, you can't do this stuff, because you're profiting off of your name. He couldn't monetize his YouTube videos, and that's where that whole thing kind of went down the rabbit hole. Now, I hear a lot about April 7th coming up regarding the settlements. What happens on that day?
It's going to be my Christmas. Christmas is coming early for people like Alicia Jessop. I've waited the last 15 years of my life for this moment. But on April 7th, there is a settlement hearing in the Northern District of California in front of a judge named Claudia Wilken, who has been involved in numerous cases involving the NCAA Alston, also the O'Bannon case, which really kickstarted this whole legal movement. But those three cases I referenced earlier, the cases being House, Carter, and Hubbard, the three most recent three antitrust law claims that were filed against the NCAA that really center on what of financial value can or cannot a college athlete receive. The NCAA and the plaintiffs last year negotiated a settlement to hopefully bring a resolution to those three cases and avoid trial. A hearing where the judge very well could approve the settlement is scheduled for April 7th. And I think a lot of people are believing that Judge Wilken will approve the settlement, which does include that revenue sharing provision. But there's also a possibility that she doesn't approve it and that she does one of two things. She either sends the parties back to the drawing board to address something, or she rejects the settlement altogether and sets the cases for trial, which would be an interesting turn of events.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Send your Christmas cards to Alicia Jessop at rulingsports.com this coming
Yes.
April 7th. I want to bring this back to UCF for a second. We're seeing a lot of schools kind of rally their financial troops, if you will, in anticipation of this. UCF just announced that they are folding their NIL collective. And then they're going to handle all the revenue and distribution in-house now. It's being referred to as the Competitive Success Fund. We're seeing this there's no one size fits all. There are a bunch of different models that are being bandied about by a bunch of schools. But is this a wise move, in your opinion, to do it this way?
Long term, yes, and maybe not that long term. I probably would have waited until this April 7th hearing to wind down my collective. I think a lot of people are getting ahead of their skis with this settlement. And what I mean by that is a lot of athletics directors, a lot of university presidents, a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers, people like Jeffrey Kessler, maybe not him specifically, but a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers are operating as if the settlement has been approved. And so they're doing things like taking the legal steps necessary to dissolve the collective and bring the operations of the collective in-house, which long term, if the settlement is approved, I do believe that makes large sense. And I can get to that a little bit more in a moment. But in the near short term, I think they're getting ahead of their skis because as a legal scholar, I'm not fully convinced that the judge approves this settlement. There are 60 plus objections to this settlement. One very notable person who has objected to this settlement is former LSU gymnast Livy Dunn. And there's a wide range of people and entities and interested parties that have filed objections. I think there's some valid concerns in those objections. And one is something that we've talked about on this show is, does this quote revenue sharing model really amount to a salary cap? And if it does, are we just perpetuating the cycle of fixing the compensation that college athletes could receive? 22% of average Power 4 conference revenue from media, tickets, and sponsorships is nothing to snuff your nose at. This is a meaningful amount of money. And there are many schools that frankly can't even afford to pay that. On the flip side, though, there are some powerhouse schools that can afford to pay way more than that. So why are we doing the same thing over and over again where we are setting these limits? And the question becomes, is this new limit defensible? Or are we coming into a scenario where 10 years from now, another college athlete is suing, saying this revenue sharing cap violates federal antitrust law under Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act? So for that reason, I say today, we're recording this in March, I'm saying it's probably too soon to fully dissolve that operation and assume that you're bringing everything in-house, unless schools are willing, regardless of the outcome of this settlement, to begin directly paying college athletes. And I think that's a story that might emerge, where even if this judge rejects this settlement, this would harken back to 2018, 2019, when states were beginning to discuss allowing college athletes to financially benefit from their NIL, which at the time would have violated existing NCAA bylaws. I think there's some schools out there who are willing to say, forget it. Sure, your rule says we're not allowed to do this. We have the money. We have the means. We want the competitive advantage that comes from it. We're going to do it, even if the judge doesn't approve this settlement.
Yeah, wow. And to clarify, I did want to bring up that UCF in their release about the Competitive Success Fund says they ask fans to maintain their support with the Kingdom, which is the NIL collective, through June 30th of 2025, exactly, and then opt into a new pledge commitment for the UCF Athletics Competitive Success Fund, with the first gift to be processed the following day, July the 1st, which is the first day of the new NCAA year.
So in that case, I do think that makes sense. And
okay,
here's why I think that makes sense. Financially, so it's, I need to be careful here. The NCAA and schools are saying that if the settlement is approved and if revenue sharing payments come by virtue of that settlement approval, they are calling those payments NIL payments. So the schools are saying that this payment is in exchange for the college athlete's name, image, and likeness as it appears or engages with various aspects of the college athletics department's enterprise. The athletics department and the university and the NCAA are very clear that they say this is not pay for play. And so to that end, it makes sense to bring the operation in-house because of the financial benefits that come with it. One, you get to build or restore those relationships with donors. You get to increase your revenue pool, and you also get to maintain control over how these agreements flow and how they operate.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think UCF is in a particularly interesting spot here, because when we think of the schools who, like you were saying, who are going to be able to afford this kind of a thing, we're thinking of the Georgias, the Floridas, the Michigans, the USCs of the world. UCF just jumped from the group of five into the Power Four or three, God knows what you want to call it. But so where do schools like UCF and other similar schools who made jumps like that, like Cincinnati, Houston, for example, where do they fit into this new system compared to those established brands? Is it going to be a much longer climb financially for them to get to that point?
Longer for sure. I'm not certain. I would say much longer. They lost out of the benefit of being a, quote, early adopter. So what do the Michigans, Texases, Notre Dames all share in common? One, they were members of their respective conferences for longer than these new members, but B, they were members 40 plus years ago when the Supreme Court decided another case, that case being Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma versus NCAA, which therein the Supreme Court said that individual schools own the broadcast rights to their games. That's really what got us here today, is a decision in 1984 where it restored broadcast right ownership to the individual school, and why schools saw the writing on the wall. They either joined new conferences or through their existing conference went out into the marketplace and secure television deals in the tens of millions of dollars. Notre Dame in 1990 signed a $30 million broadcast agreement with NBC, or hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of the SEC, which was the first major conference to have this type of broadcast deal. So those schools have been benefiting from the financial windfalls that came by virtue of their then existing membership or the wise decision making to align membership. And schools like UCF and the others that you listed see the writing on the wall and can understand where college sports is going. And in the musical chairs that is conference realignment, they danced into the conferences that likely are going to be the financial winners.
We're running a little bit long time. I know you got stuff that you got to get to, so I wanted to get to this question. What is the future of the NCAA as an entity? It feels like, everyone loves to complain about it, but they're kind of stuck in an old, with rules that were written for an old system. Mm-hmm. And, do you feel like they're prepared to fairly govern it once all the cases get settled and we reach a sort of legal equilibrium? Or should there be changes, like, for example, to the division structure between like D1, D2, D3? Like, if you were in charge, what would you do?
Yeah, it'd be great if I was in charge. I'd have a little bit more money in my bank account. So listen, I'm a member of the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Oversight Committee. So I'm a representative of the NCAA. And what I will say that I've seen in this role, so I've been in that role for about 18 months. To your point, everyone loves to beat up on the NCAA. And I've been there. Like, I'm one of the foremost outward critics of it. And so I appreciate that they even put me on this board. And I think that speaks loudly. What I've seen in this position is an increased humility, a deep willingness to listen. I'm myself when I come into these meetings. I don't hold back. I lay everything on the line. And in these meetings, I have opportunities to engage with like the power brokers of college sports. And they listen to me, and my perspective is valued. And I've seen some, not excessive, I haven't been there long enough, some decision-making flowing by hearing a different way of thinking than perhaps has frequently been represented. I think if you look at the governance moves that the association has made subsequent to the Alston decision, it realizes it can't continue operating the way it once did, and it needs to come into this new world that really began coming to an existence following the Board of Regents case. So I believe that the value proposition for the NCAA exists. The question about divisions, I think, is interesting. So if we look at a school like St. Francis, which made it to the men's basketball tournament, so it earned units, it gained the visibility of that opportunity, and following the ousting from the tournament announced that it wasn't moving to Division II, but to Division III. Right. I think you're going to see a lot more of that, because the truth of the matter is because of how the court cases have shaped out for the NCAA over the last decade, it has had to change its governance structure. It has had to change its way of operating and doing business. And what results from that is the cost of doing business grows in certain areas. And so a deeper investiture is needed in 2025 to run a Division I athletics program than even 18 months ago. And it's not just the revenue sharing, it's also this other piece, which is called the holistic college athlete model, where now to be a Division I member institutions have to make financial commitments to a long list of different deliverables that cost anywhere between $1 to $3 million. So if I was in charge, what I would do is I would surround myself with more critics. I would surround myself with more people who are willing to call into question the historic way of operating and to show leaders this is where the next lawsuit lies. This is the problem that you're not intending to walk into, but this is the problem that you're walking into by virtue of how you're operating. And I would be open to hearing things that might hurt in the interim. But if I listen to them with curiosity and engage, could save me a lot of pain in the longer term.
Yeah. Well, I I don't want to say that all that we've talked about like brings up more questions than answers, but I think it does. But because it's I think what we now know is we thought that it was kind of coming to a resolution, and it feels like, oh no, we're only just getting started. So my last question to you is, aside from obviously Christmas Day, April 7th for Alicia Jessop, what's the next thing we need to watch out for in this whole process, and who or what do we need to follow to understand more of this, aside from you, of course?
Yes, everyone should follow me at Ruling Sports. I'm not really that insufferable. That was a joke. That probably wasn't a good pitch to follow me.
I get it all the time, Alicia. It's okay.
I need to be clear that I'm speaking as an individual here, and I'm not speaking on behalf of my institution or the NCAA. Where is this going? Where this is going, the only way this ends, let me rephrase that. The only way this ends where we see a longer term stalling of litigation is the recognition of revenue producing college sport athletes. So football, men's basketball, women's basketball. In some instances, it could be softball, baseball, volleyball, depending upon the school. But we see a recognition of revenue producing college sport athletes as employees. You allow the unionization of those groups. The school, the conference, the NCAA, whoever the party is that's deemed the employer, collectively bargains with those groups' unions and reaches a collective bargaining agreement. And by virtue of that, when things like wages are collectively bargained and a salary cap is set via collective bargaining, you gain access to something called the non-statutory labor defense, where if the players come back later and sue and say, this salary cap's unfair, this salary cap violates antitrust law because it's price fixing, all the league has to do to counter that lawsuit and win is say, you collectively bargain this non-statutory labor defense. I've written about this, I've talked about this, and I said the only way out of ongoing litigation is this. What does the House settlement do if it's approved? It staves off litigation for a bit. It definitely slows it. It pacifies the college athletes. But there will be another group of college athlete plaintiffs down the road who believes that this is an unjust settlement, who believes that this 22% is unfair, and alleges that it amounts to price fixing and will wind up the antitrust wheel all over again. So how you combat against that, amongst a myriad of other things, how you regulate agents, how you keep bad agents out of this space, how you end the transfer portal, how you limit the length of time college athletes can play, to 4 years, 6 years, and not a possibility of someone doing 2 years in JUCO, 4 years in D2, and then 4 years in D1, which that fact pattern is coming. How you eliminate all of those things is through collective bargaining. And so that's where I see this going, but I don't see it going there very quickly.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. Alicia, thank you so much. You've made me and hopefully our listeners quite a bit smarter on this, because it's complicated. This is, and I nerd out about sports business and sports. This is the most complicated thing I've ever seen in my entire life, and it's pretty wild, folks. How can UCF fans follow you for all the latest on this?
Sure. So go to rulingsports.com. We have a weekly podcast. We have different social media platforms and also a weekly newsletter. So hopefully you'll subscribe.
All right. Alicia Jessop, founder of Ruling Sports, legal scholar extraordinaire, Pepperdine University, and one of the smartest people in the world, probably the smartest person in the world on this topic.
Hopefully my parents are listening.
Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Really appreciate it. And I hope we can get together again once, I was going to say once this all settles, but based on this conversation, it won't be.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not entirely. Thanks, Alicia.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Huge thanks again to Alicia. Rulingsports.com is the place where all of her content is. Written content. She's got a great podcast out there, by the way, right now as well. And you can also find her on socials, Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Huge thanks to her for this, for her insights on this. And the one thing, like I said, that we learned from the end of this, guys, is that the House settlement, even if it does become settled, this is not the end of anything. This is just the beginning. And I think the NCAA is finding it in a real difficult place. We may indeed see a situation where college sports will become, like Eric, you've been saying it in a figurative sense. It may become like it in an actual sense where, you're going to have collective bargaining. And I know the NCAA is trying to avoid that. But if it looks like a duck and it flies like a duck and it smells like a duck, it probably is a duck at this point. With regard to a league and a class of employees, really that they believe who believe they should be collectively bargaining their services for.
Yeah, I definitely could see that in the future. Certainly, contracts might be a way too where you kind of protect yourself and at least keep some of the athletes for multiple years instead of worrying about re-recruiting your rosters every year. That might be the way to do it.
Isn't it ironic that it's possible that by doing more professionalization of college sports, you cut back on the thing that I think a lot of coaches and fans dislike about the current state of college sports, in particular with player movement. Is that right?
I think that's the main thing. Yes, I think you could sense that even with the players here now entering the portal, especially in basketball, where it is everywhere, every year. It's different rosters. I think that's certainly a factor, and I think it's going to be an interesting next handful of years. And again, that's why I think a lot of college athletics departments right now are going to be a little more careful as far as transactions as far as staffs are concerned, because they don't know what the future holds. How much money you got to share with athletes, how much you're not, what sports are you going to kind of pick and choose, maybe which ones you think you're going to get behind or not. So there's a lot of ifs, a lot of questions still to be resolved.
Yeah. And the day we actually, or the day after, or the day before, actually, I talked with Alicia, we saw St. Francis of Pennsylvania, who just made the NCAA men's basketball tournament for the first time in 30 years. They announced that they were dropping from Division I to Division III, which means no scholarships whatsoever. And Eric, you've said many times, you said they're not going to be alone.
Nope, they're not going to be alone. And I do expect more of that to happen in the coming years. Not just, look, Jeff, you know more about the Northeast area. That some of those schools like the St. Francis can't compete in this landscape. They cannot.
Right.
And that's why you're taking a dip back. But I also think there's going to be a lot of football programs that are to go bye-bye and drop down as well. And maybe they should have. And I'm thinking some schools in the Midwest in particular, like the MACs and the conferences like that won't be able to compete. I think you're going to see a big separation among the haves and have-nots, wider gap than ever before. I think we touched on this last week on the show. Both the men's and the women's basketball tournaments, the Sweet 16s, all were power conference schools. You're going to see more of that. Why? Because all the best players in the mid-majors are going to power schools, and that's not going to change. So, until all of that, I think you're going to see a wider gaps, and I think you're going to see a lot of sports kind of go schools cancel some sports to kind of try to stay afloat. And it's unfortunate, but that's the landscape. And I think, again, if only the thing I always go back to is the NCAA could have really avoided all this if they were just be willing to give the student athletes a break in the past instead of nitpicking every little thing they did. Oh, this student athlete got a sandwich from this person, that's a violation. Like, no, like it's a sandwich, like lighten up. Like, but they didn't do that, chose not to do it. They chose to be strict with the athletes, and it's come back now the other way.
Let me ask you guys real quick this before we finish up, and I want to get just a quick take from each of you. Bryson, I'll start with you. UCF in the midst of all this. Are they in a good spot? Are they in a not so good spot? Buy, sell, or hold?
I think it's in a hold, mostly because the settlement has not yet been settled yet. I think UCF is in a good position in that it has a lower number of sports than something like a Stanford or things like that. I think that is definitely a help there, which means they don't have as much to spend money on in the first place. If UCF had 30 sports, like there would be some cuts. I would be saying that, but we don't. So I think there's a good chance that all of UCF sports might be able to weather this storm when it comes to that. I don't think we'll see any cuts, but it'll probably be a while before UCF would probably add a new sport at all. I think the sports that we have now are probably going to be the ones that we're going to stick with for the long haul, and it'll be quite a while before anything else could get added unless UCF comes into a lot of money real quick.
Don?
Yeah, I agree with Bryson. From a financial standpoint, you're kind of locked where you're at. And the school has big priorities in terms of, football gets most of it, as most places do, and then it's trickled down to the rest. And the tough part is just going to be competing with the financial capabilities of other institutions, but that's a conversation for a different day. But yeah, I agree with Bryson.
Eric?
Right now
No, I think you guys are on the same page. I think that's a fair point. I think there's too much unknown. I don't think they're in position of favor. Here's the thing. The programs that are in a good position are if you're in the SEC and the Big Ten, because that's who's running a lot of this stuff. Everybody else is kind of catch and go. So time will tell. Time will tell.
All right. Well, huge thanks to Alicia for shedding some light on it. Be sure to send her, like I said, a Christmas card on April 7th. Like she said, it's going to be her Christmas day. So with this settlement coming down, there's going to be a lot to talk about. And we're going to follow this very closely from a UCF perspective, of course, one way or the other when all this drops. All right. That's going to wrap it up here for us on Night Shift. Be sure to follow us or subscribe to our podcast first if you don't already on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Night Shift. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Search for Night Shift UCF on YouTube to get all the latest video and audio content from us as well. Make sure you follow us at blackandgoldbanner.com. We are SB Nation's home for UCF sports. All of our latest written content is up there. And also follow us on socials. You can follow us on X as well as Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Look for Black and Gold Banneret. Huge thanks to you guys. Huge thanks to Alicia Jessop for joining us. Make sure you follow rulingsports.com for all the latest from her. Thanks to Eric. Thanks to Don. Thanks to Bryson. Shout out to Kyle, who couldn't be with us today. For all of us here on Night Shift and Black and Gold Banneret, I'm Jeff Sharon saying thank you so much for listening. Go Knights, charge on. Hey, let's go chase that crown.